2021 has seen SACD fully assume its position of a voice of displaced Syrians recognized in key decision-making forums, with access and ability to make the policymakers aware of the position and rights of the displaced Syrians when discussing policies that affect them. We continue to struggle on several key fronts, documenting and reporting on the ongoing displacement, fighting premature return, establishing the concept of safe environment as the key precondition for safe and dignified return in any hope for lasting peace in Syria, and preventing normalization of a regime that continues a systematic policy of displacement, repression, and demographic change. We strive to engage in all relevant forums, from the direct contact with diplomats and decision-makers of key countries and institutions involved in Syria, including the likes of the UN Human Rights Council, the US Congress, and the EU. SACD firmly established its position of a credible source of information and position on behalf of displaced Syrians to defend the rights of displaced Syrians, including in cases when official positions and policies were perceived as a threat to displaced Syrians. Hence, in January, SACD published a 12-page briefing complemented by a survey of 500 displaced Syrians, which illustrated this key point. Fair and free elections are impossible without a comprehensive political solution and a safe environment for all Syrians. In 2021, SACD provided policymakers ample, ongoing analysis of the failure of the so-called reconciliation agreements as a model to be considered as relevant in the context of discussions on return. The most striking example of this failure, which continues to drive Syrians into displacement towards the north and further towards Turkey and Europe, is that of Daraa. Through a series of conversations with senior officials and experts, we strive to illuminate the Syria-focused policies of some of the key countries such as Turkey, Germany, Lebanon, and Denmark. Denmark came into a sharp focus of our advocacy due to its flawed, inhuman policy of stripping Syrian refugees from Damascus and its countryside of protection under the explanation that it is safe for them to return. SACD engaged in direct correspondence with Danish government on the issue, but also other key states of the European Union and the European Union institutions to provide ample evidence that the policy is in direct contravention of the EU Convention of Human Rights and the decisions of the European Court of Justice. SACD has invested significant effort to change the conversation on the delivery of aid to North Syria, which remains subject to open blackmail of Russia and the UN Security Council. We have mounted a diplomatic and public campaign to clearly establish that the cross-border aid can be legally delivered without the approval of the Syrian regime or the UN Security Council. SACD continued to lead on providing a deep, detailed insight into opinions and perceptions of Syrians living under the Syrian regime and documenting a reality in which horror of repression has been normalized. We issued a 91-page report based on the interviews with 533 Syrians living under Assad in different governorates, which came as the fourth such report tracking perceptions and attitudes of both internally displaced Syrians and those who never left their areas on some of the most relevant issues that must shape any conversation on the possibility of a safe, voluntary and dignified return of displaced Syrians and the eventual political solution that could offer a hope for a lasting peace in Syria. Unfortunately, one of the main fronts where we needed to intervene and dismantle the narrative of normalization of the Syrian regime as a guarantor of security to returnees was that of public statements given by the most senior UNHCR officials in Syria. In response to such statements made by the head of UNHCR during a mission to Syria, which was forwarded to representatives of key countries and institutions involved in Syria, the 14 members of the SACD Board of Trustees wrote, We are aware that the horror and shock of the millions of Syrians are easy to ignore for most of the decision makers drunk on the supposed supremacy of realpolitik over the notion of justice and rights. However, we must ask the question, what do those who think that normalization of Assad is the solution to the Syrian nightmare believe will happen as a result? SACD continues to work hard on dismantling the parallel reality which is being constructed, in which return of more than 13 million of displaced Syrians can even be discussed before a safe environment for all Syrians is established. One of the key puzzles in that picture is the role of the UN and international aid agencies in Syria, which was the subject of our substantive report and interviews we conducted with current and former UN and NGO staff to reveal how the Syrian regime uses humanitarian aid to entrench its repression of Syrian people. In 2022, we will continue to face enormous challenges as the world continues to turn its head away from the plight of the Syrian people and displaced Syrians in particular. But as before, we commit to strive to do even more and to elevate the rights of displaced Syrians to the top of the agenda in all conversations on the future of the country. We will fight for the rights of displaced Syrians everywhere, for a safe environment for all Syrians in Syria, for the right to a safe, dignified and voluntary return, for the displaced Syrians' inherent right to define the conditions of return, against premature return, and against any decisions harmful and detrimental to the rights of displaced people. We are committed to the cause of millions of displaced people who may have lost everything, but will never give up on their dignity and rights. We'll continue to build a powerful movement which will make sure that no decision is taken in our name without our voice being heard and taken into account, for we are Syria.